The ballads never capture the true darkness that money and influence can breed. Not in these parts, not beneath this scorching sky. Here, wickedness moves without sound, hushed as a grave. Evil doesn't announce itself with noise. It simply shows up unwelcome, lingering until some unfortunate soul decides to let it in. That particular morning, Caleb Thorne made that fateful choice. The Arizona desert around Tombstone lay still under a suffocating dawn. Caleb emerged from his cabin, mug of coffee warming his palm, weathered planks groaning beneath his weight. The endless expanse remained motionless. Not even a breeze stirred the air. He'd ventured out to tend his animals. What seized his attention wasn't a wandering steer. Instead, a weathered cart sat abandoned by his property line. No owner in sight, no wheel marks in the dirt, just dust and blazing heat. A tired, mule waited tethered to a fence post, mindlessly chewing, as though it had been standing there far too long. Beneath a ragged tarp in the wagon's bed lay something, or someone. A scrap of paper was wedged into the rope's binding. Debt settled, goods delivered as promised. Caleb's eyes narrowed. He'd made no purchases, and any respectable merchant would have announced himself properly. Moving closer, the stench reached him first. Perspiration, dried blood, ancient terror. Slowly, he peeled back the covering. A young woman lay there, perhaps 22, grimy and battered, her breathing labored as if her body questioned whether to continue. Rope bound her arms, her mouth parched and split. Along her spine, barely discernible, ran deep, vicious markings. When her lids fluttered apart, she gazed at him with the hollow stare of someone who'd already visited death's door. In a voice barely audible, she murmured, "You bought me. Complete what you started." Caleb remained silent. No interrogation, no visible shock, just steady observation. The reality is, men believe they've witnessed damnation on battlefields. But true hell isn't found in warfare. Hell is a broken soul delivered to your threshold, mutilated and abandoned, while someone believes they've granted you a gift. He freed her bindings, lifted her carefully inside, settled her in the spare room's corner. For the first time in years, Caleb Thorne found himself completely lost. But if you imagine this is merely a tale of an abandoned woman at a stranger's door, you haven't discovered what burden she carries. Eliza remained mostly mute during those initial days. Her sleep was restless, like someone terrified of lengthy unconsciousness. Caleb didn't press her. He'd encountered enough quietude to understand its natural cadence. Certain men bombard with questions. He wasn't among them. He provided warmth, placed meals within reach, kept fresh water and a metal cup beside her bed, never entered her space unless she slumbered or required assistance. Such restraint demands patience, perhaps tinged with remorse. When he tended her wounds, those markings revealed themselves again. The way they swept down her back, calculated and purposeful. Nothing accidental about them. Someone had worked methodically, as if inscribing a message. Caleb didn't inquire, but noticed how her frame tensed whenever footsteps echoed on wooden floors. The third evening, she sat upright, unassisted. Wordlessly, she fixed her gaze on the flames, as though expecting a response. Caleb settled nearby, with his coffee. Eventually, she spoke, soft and weary. "You haven't harmed me." He glanced up, simply nodded. "Most would have." Caleb added another piece of wood to the fire. His words came low, almost self-directed rather than meant for her. "I'm not like most. That was all." No lengthy declarations, no gentle melodies, just that simple truth. During the following week, she began contributing around the homestead. She groomed the horses, washed dishes without prompting. One dawn, Caleb heard her humming. No melody. He knew, but it represented sound. Genuine sound from someone who'd been nothing but mute. In that instant, understanding struck him. This extended beyond nourishing an injured stranger. He was witnessing a spirit crawl back from an abyss only she could see. But if healing seems like a direct journey, prepare yourself. What she's preparing to reveal will shatter everything. By week 2, the silence shattered. Not during mealtime, not in daylight. It emerged late when the fire dimmed and the coyotes had quieted. Eliza's words barely rose above a whisper, yet they struck like a bullet. She revealed her story to Caleb. Not completely, just enough. Enough to make his muscles tighten. She'd labored in the grand residence of a county administrator. Neat clothing, endless hours, but initially tolerable. Then came the wagering, the obligations, and when payment proved impossible, he used her as collateral, a stake he could afford to forfeit. One night she was seized, restrained, and marked by the very individuals sworn to enforce justice. That scar across her back wasn't random violence. A word had been carved with a blade. Worthless. Caleb offered no response, maintaining his stare at the flames. But internally, fury simmered. He'd served in conflicts, witnessed men disemboweled and abandoned, yet nothing haunted him like this. This wasn't combat. This was cowardice, occurring beneath the banner he'd once bled defending. Eliza watched him then, waiting for words, any response. But silence prevailed. He rose, stepped outside, and returned with ink-stained fingers and correspondence on the table. A letter to a former military companion in Tucson who now held influence at the garrison. Caleb required neither weapons nor violence. He needed evidence. Eliza's scars provided proof enough. For the first time, she glimpsed hope. Not joy, not mirth, but the simple recognition that someone deemed her suffering worthy of documentation. It was a beginning. Now viewers might wonder where this leads. If you're still here, you probably want to discover how far Caleb's controlled fury will carry him and what it means for Eliza's journey toward healing. That's the type of narrative we share. If you want the continuation, consider subscribing. It keeps you by our fire. Trust me. Things are about to intensify. A week passed before the desert brought a visitor. Not the courteous kind who knocks politely. This rider approached near sunset, dust trailing his mount, hat shadowing his face, the type demanding constant vigilance. Caleb spotted him from the porch. Before the man dismounted, familiar tension crept into Caleb's chest. Trouble announced, itself without words. The stranger called out with ownership's arrogance, inquiring about the delivery. He avoided her name, wouldn't even acknowledge her humanity, just the delivery. Enough to set Caleb's jaw. He leaned against the post, hand relaxed near his weapon but not drawn. The man dismounted heavily, boots striking earth hard, eyes shifting toward the cabin window. Eliza watched through gaps, breathing shallow, shoulders trembling. Caleb offered. No hospitality, just waited with characteristic stillness for the stranger's next move. It came quickly. The man announced his intention to reclaim what was never his to begin with, advancing toward the door. That's when Caleb acted. No shouting, no theatrics, one sharp step forward, fist gripping the man's collar, cold steel pressed beneath his chin. The confrontation ended swiftly. No need for prolonged violence. Caleb sought conclusion, not murder. Moments later, the intruder lay on the cabin floor, wrists secured with rope, mouth gagged tight. Eliza didn't celebrate or smile. She simply observed from her corner in amazement, as someone finally placed themselves between her and those who treated her existence like a gambling token. Caleb hauled the stranger outside, secured him to the post, then waited for sunrise. The desert punishes arrogance. Men arrive thinking they can seize what they desire, but here, the land and silence always collect payment. He knew Tucson soldiers would pass soon, and they'd receive their proof in flesh and blood, not merely written words. If you think one man tied to a post concludes this story, hold tight. When authority faces challenge, it doesn't remain passive. It retaliates. That retaliation was already approaching. Dawn brought soldiers from Tucson, dust clouds following their approach. Caleb surrendered both the bound man and his written testimony. They accepted both without question, the captive's guilt evident in his expression. Eliza stood in the doorway, watching horsemen vanish into the horizon. For the first time, she realized the struggle was no longer hers to bear alone. Someone had stood beside her, and the world had finally paid attention. The subsequent days transformed. No more anticipating footsteps at the entrance or shadows on the porch. She prepared meals, tended the land, even laughed occasionally, surprising herself as much as Caleb. He remained largely quiet, continuing his routine. But their shared silence no longer felt oppressive. It had become peace. One evening, by the same fire where she'd once whispered her desperate plea, she told Caleb she wished to remain, not from lack of alternatives, but because this was the first place offering her genuine choice. Caleb didn't respond immediately, just nodded slowly, the kind of acknowledgement worth more than countless words. On that ranch, distant from political noise and greed, two souls discovered that healing doesn't always arrive in thunder or bloodshed. Sometimes it comes quietly, in water bubbling on the stove, in a scar that aches less, in a man who chooses listening over demanding. Perhaps we too often forget that sometimes the greatest power lies not in drawing a weapon, but in selecting compassion when the world expects brutality. Maybe the wounds we bear, however deep, aren't our story's conclusion, but evidence we continued forward. Let me pose this question. In Caleb's position, would you have lifted that canvas? Would you have carried her inside? Or would you have turned away like so many others? If this narrative touched you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It keeps you here with us, where Old West stories remind us not only of our past, but who we can still choose to become. Because ultimately, the West wasn't just about territory and firearms, it was about people, both shattered and courageous.